I think there's a narrative in the media about violence getting worse and about children being less safe that unfortunately the truth about video games and violence probably doesn't support that narrative as well. So I think the media gets into issues where they want to report things and they want people to watch. So they use links that maybe people don't understand. So they'll talk about someone who shot someone else as someone who's played video games. But they won't mention that most people play video games, or they won't mention that violence in youth is actually at a record low in the last 20 years. So I think there is a narrative out there, and there's lots of information, but the media does tend to play up the relationship probably stronger than it is. I mean, it's not a sexy article to say, violence is at an all-time low in 2013. It's much more sexy to say boy shot another person because of a video game. It sells, people click on it, people want to read about it, and it reinforces what the society believes right now, which is that video games are bad. Most people have a negative view of video games, especially in older generations. This is despite the fact that 98% of kids now play video games. Gaming is a normal thing. The average gamer is now 29 years old. This is something that will get replaced with just being normal. It's to the point now that saying someone plays video games is the same as saying they breathe oxygen or they drink orange juice. This is not an inflammatory thing anymore, but it's made to be some sort of boogeyman. The rush to report on the links and what's happened, it sort of just leaves it at the headline. The child played video games. There isn't a lot of exposition of that. They kind of just leave it out there, or they talk about the controversy of the link. I think it'll take two things. One is for the moral panic to die down. I think the more the numbers continue to improve. Like I say, in the last 20 years, murder rates in youth, violence in youth, sexual assaults in youth, smoking in youth, drunk driving in youth, these are all at record lows in 2011 in the last 20 years. As those numbers continue to decrease, the panic of the situation will get better. But that does require the media to make it look like the numbers are getting lower. The general population probably doesn't know that those things are at an all-time low. They feel, because of the way the media reports violence, that violence is worse than it's ever been, that it's more likely that someone's going to get killed if they're a kid, when the reverse is true. So there is a responsibility of the media that unfortunately right now they're not really picking up. I mean, moral panics actually go way back to even BC days, when you have Plato talking about how poetry is going to ruin kids, people writing about how Shakespeare is going to make children murderers and adulterers. The novel is going to make people, in the 18th century there's a big hubbub that the novel was going to make people more violent. It goes all the way into the 20th century where jazz music, rock and roll, coffee shops, television, these things have all been implicated as things that are going to destroy the minds of our youth. And these moral panics sort of follow this typical cycle where something is believed, it's reported upon, that belief is hyped up. Then people say, hey, let's study it. But they really only are looking for one answer. So the things that say, yeah, your belief is right, they keep. The things that say that the belief is wrong, they don't. And so it just spins this wheel around, that you just get all this research supporting it. In the early 1920s, there was a hospital music association that was talking about using jazz music in school, in hospitals, could lead to higher fatality rates in the hospital, which is ridiculous on its face, but that was the science at the time, that was the concern at the time, and there was increasing pressure to remove jazz from society because it was going to be so deleterious to patients. So these moral panics have been around for a really long time. Video games are part of that. But I think the fact that gaming is so common now, especially in the under 40 demographic, I can see the moral panic in the next 10 years fading away.
Is it easier to make a successful study or to get funding for a study if you approach video games by trying to find a causal link between violence and video games?
I think in the climate we have right now, it's a lot easier to get funding if you're going to support the idea that video games cause violence. If you go out specifically looking for other aspects of video games, it's going to be harder to find funding. That should get better, and scientific organizations are getting better at giving out grants based upon the, even if you're going to find a negative study, negative value is important. But right now there's such a pressure to publish for those who are in the industry of getting scientific data out there, that they're really looking for a positive effect. They're looking for a link. It's not a very noteworthy article to find nothing. And people don't understand the value of finding nothing. People think that that's a throwaway. Oh, I wasted my time doing that research. But actually finding nothing can be an important thing, especially when we look at all of the, a lot of the publications on video games and violence. For every one that's been published, there's been at least one or two that haven't been published that show that there isn't a link. And so it creates this appearance that there's a lot of support for the idea that video games cause violence, but that's probably not true.
As a doctor, have you been disappointed in the media's coverage of the video game issues?
I mean, in general, I think the media handles science poorly, so it doesn't necessarily extend to just the video game aspect. I think science is a very tricky thing for media to report on because they don't understand that scientists never say they're sure of something.
Is there damage when you write an article and you even bring up video games in one sentence and violence in the other? Even if you seem to be impartial, you're still implying a causal link.
A lot of media reporting is designed to get people to watch or get people to read. So the headline writing is definitely designed to grab someone's attention. And those words are very easy to put together because there's this societal belief that you can pander to that video games are bad. So it's really easy to put those things together. I think the harm is underplayed, and it's certainly from people in the media who are gamers or myself. When I read it, you do literally wince when you're reading it because you just know that in that article they're going to mention it and it's going to come up and it's not going to be reported well. So there's a damage done just by perpetuating the myth. Where it could be easily offset by a second sentence right after that saying, despite video game proliferation, violence is at an all-time low. That simple sentence, which you can check out, you can go to any bureau. I get the numbers straight from the Bureau of Justice. You can get it online. You can verify that fact. You don't even need to, put a lot of work into it. You could add that sentence right after talking about video games and violence and just deflate that whole thing. But obviously that's not something that right now the media is interested in doing.